there's a whole set of ratios and proportions
Yes.
embedded in creation itself. And whether we're talking sacred scripture and prophecy, whether we're talking architecture, whether we're talking art, whether we're talking growing things, whether we're talking about the great temporal relationships, time cycles, we're going to find the same numbers, the same ratios at work. And then I show historic metrology, which is showing like the Egyptian remen, an Egyptian unit of linear measure analyzed by F.H. Griffith in 1892 and by William Flinders Petrie and A.E. Berriman, considered to be equal to 20 digits or 14.58 inches. A.E. Berriman, in his work Historical Metrology, refined the length of the remen to be 1.2165. So if you take this calculator, Danny,
Right.
put in 1.2165, now that'll be in feet. That's the length of the remen. So you can see that it's a little bit, now this is an ancient Egyptian unit of measurement.
The remen.
The remen. It's a little bit longer than our foot, right?
Right.
Okay, so now there was another unit of measurement used in Egypt called the royal cubit. It was discovered by Isaac Newton in his analysis of the dimensions of the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid based upon the Survey of Greaves in 1637, which, in fact, I'm sure you were well aware of. Also mentioned in the writings of Herodotus in his description of the city of Babylon. With slight variations, the accepted length of the royal cubit is taken as 1.72 feet or 20.6265. Now put in 1.72.
Am I clearing out the 1.265?
No, leave that. Actually, okay, here's what you're going to divide by 1.72.
1.72.
Right?
Okay.
Now, you see there's a little 1 over X button?
Oh, no, I hit equals.
Okay, you got to hit equals.
Okay, let me try this again.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to this.
1.2.
Put in 14.58 inches.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Now divide by 20.6265.
Okay.
Equals, what'd you get?
0.70685.
Okay, so now do you see the 1 over X? Because we're going to flip the ratio. Little 1 over X button. It should be.
It's a button. Got it. Let's see. 1 over X.
Third row.
Yep, got it.
Column. Hit that button.
Okay.
What'd you get?
1.414711934.
Okay, 1.414 basically.
Yes.
All right. Now, right to the right of that button, you'll see X squared. Hit
Got
that
it.
button. What'd you get?
2.0014.
So what you're looking at is the square root of 2. So what you just did, Danny, was you showed that the ratio of the royal cubit, the remen to the royal cubit, so the Egyptians knew this. If they drew a square, which was 1 remen on the side, and you drew its diagonal, the diagonal was the royal cubit. So that exercise we just went through, if you draw a square and it's 1 remen, which is, as it says here, say 14.58 inches.
Okay.
Its diagonal is going to be the royal cubit. And that was the basis of their measuring system, was that dynamic relationship of a square and its diagonal. Now, the royal cubit was used, like I said, by Newton in his analysis of the King's Chamber. Of the King's Chamber. It's also the thickness of the socle.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the pyramid sits on. Well, then, if we jump forward, the Palestinian cubit, the knowledge of the Palestinian cubit survives in the writings of Epiphanius, a bishop of Constantia in Cyprus, who wrote a treatise on weights and measures in AD 392. It conforms to the cubit of the altar, as mentioned in Ezekiel 43:13. That is, the cubit and the hand's breadth. The Palestinian cubit is generally taken as 25.284. Put 25.284 in your calculator, and I'll do the same here, 25.284.
Got it.
Now we're going to divide that by the remen, which is 14.58, and hit equals. Now hit your X squared key.
3.
3. So it's the square root of 3. So in other words, imagine this now. Now the Palestinian cubit is used roughly in Palestine area about 1,000 years after the royal cubit and reman are being used in Egypt. Picture now, you start with a reman, you draw a square. Take its diagonal, that gives you the royal cubit. Use that to get your root 2 rectangle and take its diagonal. That diagonal is now the Palestinian cubit.
Got it.
Got it?
Got it.
So now we've got the Roman pace, the origin of the Roman mile. Now, you know the mile comes from the pace, right? You know what a pace is?
That's just like a human walking?
A human walking. Now imagine if you're going to pace out, you've got a field and you want to know roughly how big it is. You don't have a measuring tape. You figure, it's about an acre, but I'm going to pace it out.
Yeah.
Well, if it's in the old days and you're a surveyor or a builder, an architect, you're going to know pretty precisely the length of your pace because that's a common way of determining land measure is you pace things out initially. Mm-hmm. We didn't have transits and builders, instruments back then. We used things like ropes and chains. And
back then, what are we talking about back then?
Anywhere before, from a few 150, 200 years ago.
Okay.
All the way back.
Okay.
Pacing something out.
Okay.
How many paces? Now, if you're pacing something out, you know that you're going to quickly learn that it's much easier if you are counting every other step than every step, right? You don't count left, right. You go right, and you count, say, every time your right foot hits the ground. Okay, now, if you do 1,000 of those, that was the origin of the mile.
We've been using the mile for that long?
Oh, mile goes back. You find the mile, think about this, 1,000 paces. So you had a Roman mile, which was 1,000 paces in Rome. Now think of the word mile and think of the word mill, which means 1,000.
1,000, that's right. Millennium, yeah.
Yeah, like a millennium.
A
millimeter, 1,000th of a meter.
Ah, okay.
So that's the origin. The mile and the mill, it's 1,000. So the original meaning of the mile was 1,000 paces. Now, our mile, how many feet are in our mile, Danny? I'm holding you conspicuous before the entire world at this moment.
1,000.
1,000
feet?
I
don't know. Let me guess.
Somebody, do you have your ruler?
10,000?
That boy needs his wrists.
10,000?
Hey,
I failed algebra.
Delivering any of that.
Ben?
I will claim the metric system, unfortunately, as the basis for my education.
No. We can cut Ben some
small get out of jail card free.
Okay. Now this is
He's got an excuse. I don't.
Our fathers and our grandfathers all knew this. I think certainly farmers and builders and people like that who lived close to the land knew that our mile is 5,280 feet.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you divide 5,280 feet by 1,000, you'll get the length of the pace upon which our mile that we use today is based, right? So 5,280 feet, divide that by 1,000. That means that each pace was
5.28.
5.28. Very good. Right. Yes. 5.28 feet. If you had your notebook there in class, I would be getting you to write that down.
5.28.
5.28. Okay, you got it. 5.28. Now you look at the Roman pace here, and it's equal to 4.86 feet.
So they were shorter.
Yeah. You got it. Now our mile is part of the imperial system that goes back to ancient Britain. Now, I've looked at the surveys of Stonehenge, for example, and if you take the big outer ring of sarsen stone circles, within a few inches, it's 105.6 feet in diameter, right? And if you look at the sarsen stone uprights, which are the big stones forming that outer circle, that ring, there are lintels on top. Mm-hmm. And those lintels are an average length of 10.56 feet. 10.56 times 10 is 105.6. Think about that. Okay, so if you were to draw a ring on the ground, a circular ring that's 105.6 feet in diameter, Stonehenge would fit within a few inches within that ring. Now, the fact that they were using a consistent unit of measure is verified or confirmed by the fact that the distance, if you go around that ring,
Right.
and there's 30 uprights, which are most of the surveys and studies assume that there was originally 30 of those uprights, and several of the lintels, the horizontal lintels that cap those uprights, are still in place. Their average length is 10.56 feet. So think 10.56 times 10 gives you that ring.
Okay.
Okay, got that?
Got it.
Now what's 105.6 times 100?
105.6 times 100.
No, times 50, I'm sorry.
528. 5,280.
Our mile.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So what does that suggest? It doesn't prove, but it suggests that the builders of Stonehenge were using a system of measurement from which we derive our mile.
When do we think Stonehenge was built?
Well, it's Neolithic.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking like, I think it's, what, 5,000 BC or somewhere like that, or maybe even earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's old.
At least Neolithic. I mean,
At least Neolithic.
Yeah.
So at least 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. At least, if not older.
Yeah.
Okay.
This suggests that our mile is that old. And they were using, if they had a mile of 5,280 feet, and you divide that by exactly 50, they now draw a ring on the ground, and that's the diameter of the Sarsen stone circle at Stonehenge. And you divide that by 10, and that gives you the average spacing of the Sarsen stone uprights. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's
bizarre.
now these are the kind of things we look at in the course that I do. Okay, so
Okay.
when we look at the Roman pace, which is basically almost Middle Eastern, right? It's, in Italy, not Middle Eastern, but it's Mediterranean. We'll call it Mediterranean. We're looking at roughly 2,000 years ago when the Roman pace was in Rome. It was well known that you had the city center, and the Roman mile was 1,000 paces out from the city center. Okay, so if we look at here, 1/1000th of the Roman mile is equal to 8 stades of 607.5 feet. Now that stade is where we get our term stadium from.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right?
really?
Yeah. Now a stadium was the distance around, so the British version of the stadium was called the furlong. And we don't know how old the furlong is, but it was apparently very ancient. Now, the only place that I know of where furlongs are still used today is where, Ben?
Racetracks.
Yeah,
right?
racetracks.
Oh, horse race tracks.
Yeah. But the furlong to the ancient Britons was 660 feet. 660 feet is 1/8 of a mile. Try it. 660 times 8 and see if you get 5,280.
5,280.
There you go. So a furlong was 1/8 of a mile. What's the origin of the furlong? I don't know. It's old. But see, that's more confirmation that the mile that we use today has ancient roots. Now here's something else that's interesting. We talked earlier about the Earth that we live on is an oblate spheroid.
Indeed.
And we know, as Ben was talking about, the equatorial diameter is 26 miles greater than the polar diameter.
Right.
All right. It varies from.
Now, why is that?
It's spinning.
Spinning.
Think about any spinning system. The centrifugal force is going to throw the mass of it towards the equator of the spin. And thank that God that it does, because otherwise conditions on the surface of the Earth would be so chaotic that it's highly doubtful that any kind of higher life ever could have evolved.
So if the Earth was a perfect sphere spinning, how would that disrupt the Earth? How would that disrupt everything, like the Earth's crust, the oceans?
Well, there would be, this equatorial bulge acts as a stabilizing flywheel.
Okay.
Right? And the Earth is not perfectly rigid. But it's interesting that you said if the Earth was a perfect sphere. If the Earth was a perfect sphere, what would be the measure of that sphere that would then have the same volume as the actual Earth? Well, the actual Earth varies from 7,926 miles at the equator, 7,900 miles at the polar diameter, so a difference of 26 miles. So what that means is that if you're standing at the equator, you're 13 miles farther away from this Earth's center than if you were standing at the North or South Pole.
Right.
And it also, you could think of it this way, if you traveled from the equator to one of the poles, you're going downhill 13 miles.
Oh my
Right?
God.
Right? Now let's think about this. Okay, so what would be, I'm glad you brought up the idea of the perfect sphere, because again, when we're talking about creation manifest in 3 dimensions, and the idea of sacred geometry is that behind the actual manifested 3-dimensional physical universe is this template, the template of geometry. In that template of geometry, you've got idealized numbers, okay? Now, the idealized number of the Earth would be what you just said. What would be the size of the Earth that was a perfect sphere, let's say, that had the same volume as the actual Earth?
Yes.
It would be
yes.
7,920 miles.
If we squished it into a perfect sphere.
If it was a perfect sphere,
Okay.
same volume as the actual Earth, 7,920. Get that number in
I'm
your
going
head.
to write that down. 7,920.
7,920.
Okay.
Got that number in your
Got
head? Okay. Let's go back to the furlong that we were talking about. Okay. Furlong, we agreed, was 1/8 of a mile, 660 feet. How many inches in 660 feet?
It's going to be the same number.
7920. What the fuck kind of sorcery is this? Whoa.
Now let's think of what we just saw here. Okay, we said the Earth, 7,920 miles, right? We've already determined that the mile is a human-derived unit of measurement based upon paces. You go and you walk out 1,000 paces on the surface of the Earth, and it's 5,280 feet.
Whoever developed the mile knew the circumference of the Earth.
Well, I'm not going to go make that claim, but there's something weird going on here. Now, picture, there's 2 things. When you say that the mile is 5,280 feet, each of those paces is 5.28 feet. So think you've got a ratio. The ratio is the length of the human pace to the human foot. That's ultimately the ratio of our mile. The pace to the foot, 5.28 feet, and 1,000 of those paces is our mile that we use today. Key number, that ratio, 5.28 feet, okay? You got to keep that in mind. And I know that, you have to work with these numbers for a while before they become embedded as part of your consciousness, part of your framework, your conceptual framework of reality. You just saw that the furlong, 7,920 inches. So think of this. You've got a furlong, 660 feet. Let's say you lay that out on the ground, and I have actually done this. Find a nice big open field or parking lot, lay out 660 feet. And then you mark out 1 inch, which, oh, by the way, is the width of your thumb originally, your digit. That's where the inch comes from, right? Put your thumb on a piece of paper, draw a hit on either side. You've got your inch. That's a derivation of the inch. So all of this is connecting human anatomy. You've got your inch. You've got your foot. You've got your pace. You've got your cubit, right? So now this is all linking the geometry to the human anatomy. So now here's the final thing that you want to get in your mind, the relationship. The furlong is to the inch as the Earth is to a mile. Got it?
Got it.
Okay, let's go further with this.
Oh,
Are you ready? I mean, this is we're just kind of like got one leg down into the rabbit hole. What I like to do is I like to get people that they put one leg in, then 2 legs, and while they're peering down, I come up behind them and I give them a push.
ooh. Let's go.
There you go. Okay, so in the book of Revelation, we were talking about the prophecy. there. St. John the Divine, he's met with the angel with the line of flax and the measuring reed, and he's got to measure the holy city and all of this. Then later on, it's describing his vision of the holy city. And it says, the city lieth foursquare, and the length and the height and the breadth of it are equal. What would that suggest to you? Foursquare, but that's got length, it's got height, and it's got breadth.
Cube.
Cube. A cube.
Okay.
12,000 furlongs. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length and the height and the breadth of it are equal 12,000 furlongs. Okay? How far is that? Put 12,000 in, and we know that a furlong is 660 feet. So go 12,000 furlongs.
7,920,000.
Now just look at the first four digits.
7920.
Does that look familiar?
Yes.
Yes. So now that's a lot of feet. Let's put that into some ratio.
That's the Earth.
Yeah. That's the measure of the earth times 1,000. Now let's put that, but that's feet. We just converted that to feet.
Got it. Okay. That's why it's so much.
But who can picture what's 7,920,000 feet? Let's convert that to miles.
Okay.
So you're going to divide by 5,280.
1,500.
1,500 miles. Now what's the ratio between that and the actual earth? So here's what, you've already got that in your calculator, right?
1,500, yep.
So that'll put 1,500 on top, divide by Earth, 7920 on the bottom. Now you're going to flip that by hitting 1 over x, so that you put the big number on top and the small number on bottom.
Okay, I just did the divided. It gave me 0.18.
Okay, and then hit 1 over x.
Okay, 1 over x. 5.28. What in the fuck is this, Randall?
Okay, so
It's all connected.
yeah,
The implications that of this sacred geometry and some of the oldest structures that we found, basically it implies that they understood this long history.
yes, that's what I would read into it. Yes, that somewhere what this is showing, and I mean we've just scratched the surface of this.
Right.
I think what it's showing us is that somebody back whenever, and I would trace it right back into prehistory, had a very sophisticated knowledge of the architecture of creation. And they understood not only the spatial relationships, but the temporal relationships as well. And they were able to apply that in terms of sacred building, in terms of a technology.